A note to listeners, the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Started showing him, hey, I'm driving this brand new car that he was able to obtain. Fred couldn't understand how he got this. And he eventually introduced him into the business that he was dealing in. Well, lo and behold, he was actually working for Mickey Cohen at that time. It was very well known that Mickey had his drug fingers throughout most of the United States, especially in California.
And he actually gets into boxing for a time. He was a pretty good little boxer, but the thing that, kind of like the brothers, the thing that kind of really lured him was organized crime or crime in the streets, that whole environment. We've seen a number of movies like Godfather and there was another one, I forget the name of it.
Goodfellas.
It was something about America. I remember America was...
Once Upon a Time in America.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time in America. Just that kind of a story. That was really Mickey's story. It had talent, had ability, and you start small. You start doing things on the street for the drug guys or for the mob guys. And if you showed ability, you just kind of worked your way up the ranks.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman. Hi, everyone. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, even if it's one word.
And please subscribe to our website, www.partnersintruecrime. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram to check out our weekly promos. We're also now on YouTube at Partners in True Crime. If you subscribe to our website, you'll be getting weekly emails from us and all kinds of promotions and things that we don't advertise on the podcast.
Just want to give you a friendly reminder that Ken and Mike's book, Alcatraz, The Last Escape, is available. So go ahead and order it now. Also, your comments have been great, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Please feel free to reach out to us at partnersintruecrime.com with any questions that you might have. Also, don't forget to check out our other podcasts, Who Killed Molly Miller and Cole Haynes, and The Serial Killer Whisperer. That's 3 days of Partners in True Crime podcasts, all made for you, our listeners.
Today, we continue to dive deeper into this historic story, which has so many layers that it's almost unbelievable, but it's all true.
When Ken and Mike started working on their book, they were amazed on where they ended up getting their information from. A lot of it, of course, came from Ken's family history, but other sources came from many unlikely people, and that is what we're going to discover today. All right, so we're back with Ken and Mike and our journey to escape from Alcatraz. And we've been having a lot of fun listening to these stories. And Ken, I'm almost done with the book now, and I can see you got the books behind you there. People, if you really want to hear and read a great story, listen to this podcast and read the book. We're just hitting like the big broad strokes here in the podcast, but there's a lot of details in that book about these two gentlemen, Ken's uncles, who did this miraculous escape. But the story behind the story is even more fascinating. So what I'd love to talk about today is, I think we left off is the Fred Brizzi, and we touched on him a little bit on the last podcast and how they met him and everything, but I'd love to kind of, for our audience, just to kind of review a little bit of that and then kind of jump into the next phase of what those guys were dealing with. As far as Fred went to New Mexico for a little bit, then came back, and then a lot of interesting things there. And then there's the whole LA connection, the Mickey Cohen connection, how they met Mickey Cohen through Fred Brizzi. So kind of start laying it out for us and paint the picture of how that connection happened, because later on, what people don't know is that plays a really important part in their escape.
Yes, and it does, because to think about the escape, you really have to kind of think about that they had help. It wasn't a just get down to the bay, to the water line in the bay, and okay, what do we do next? So they had a plan and they had help. And we would find out later, as we started kind of doing some digging, that it was one of their childhood friends. You referenced him, Fred Brizzi. We bring him early into the story because he plays a major role in the story. I didn't really kind of realize how close they were. I don't ever remember my family mentioning Fred Brizzi at all, even though he went to school with a lot of the Anglin family. He lived very close to them, and John and Clarence were very close to him. Don't ever remember hearing his name until, I will have to say, he was the patriarch of the Anglin family after my grandfather died. And we bring him into the story because he's very instrumental in setting up the escape plan on the outside. And we'll talk about their older brother, Robert Anglin, a little later. But he is the first time that I really kind of met Fred Brizzi when he came to the Anglin family gathering in 1992. And he told the story of him going down to Brazil, meeting with the brothers, taking the photographs that he eventually shared with the family. He gave a lot of detail about where they lived at and the farm. And so when we started kind of doing the book, I said, okay, there's got to be way more to Fred Brizzi than what we've heard in the 1992 interview that was done. So as we started digging through historical records and newspapers, we started uncovering where not only was Fred Brizzi friends with them when he was small, but he also got in trouble with them around the same time that they, like I said, they wound up in Mariana and a boys' industrial school. Fred Brizzi was there at the exact same time. They just became, according to Fred, kind of painted it as, that they were childhood friends, and then he didn't run into them again until he met them in Brazil, which is kind of a crazy story to begin with. But as you started listening to the interview he gave to the Anglin family in 92, he gave such detailed information about the escape that only someone either with the knowledge of physically being there when it happened, or he would have had to have had access to the FBI files, which we know wasn't released until early 2000s. So he had no access to these files, and yet he was able to say and give information that is only in those files. So that really kind of, for me and Mike, I don't know about Mike, but it did for me. It really, to me, gave me hard evidence that he was participating in this escape. And then we go back into, of course, he was a drug dealer. He got into flying his airplane, taking drugs out of South America. And so as we started peeling the onion back, so to speak, and we started looking at early lives of Fred Brizzi, we see where he not only helped them in the escape, but he's also the one who introduces them to Mickey Cohen.
Yeah.
Fred was early into the drug business. And
let me stop you right there, because
Sure.
I'd love to kind of ramp up in there, because there's a lot of cool information that leads up to that.
Okay.
And that how Fred Brizzi, he went back, he lived in New Mexico for a little bit of time because his family had to move there because there was no jobs in Florida, and his father had to take a electrician job to work on a dam out there. And so they were out there for a little bit. He came back, and then he reconnected with those guys, and then he kept on getting in trouble with the brothers, and all these little things that they were doing, these heists and stealing stuff and everything. And so the father, according to the book, said that he wanted him to get his pilot's license. Maybe, hopefully, that'll get him off the crime spree that he's been doing and doesn't turn into a criminal. Ironically, that it did just the opposite. And so talk about the story. I love the story when he went back to visit a friend of his in New Mexico and how he got introduced into the drug trafficking world.
So after, Mike, you can jump in with some of this too, because I know me and you both did this digging into the piece of this story. But we do know that Fred, when he came back with his family after being pulled from Ruskin, Florida, or the area that he was growing up in, all the way into just outside of Tucumcari, New Mexico, which I'd been there before. Believe it or not, I have a relative that used to live there. Didn't even know that. And I've been there, and it's a very desolate place. Even when I went, 1988. So I can imagine what it looked like back in the early 50s, late 40s. And so, we just know that once he got out there, he was not very happy, him or his sister. They eventually, after the project is completed, they moved back to the Ruskin, Tampa Bay area, where he connects back with John and Clarence. And from there, you can pretty much look at his rap sheet and you can compare it to John and Clarence's. They pretty much picked up where they left off. It was like they had never been separated. and one would get in trouble, the other wouldn't get in trouble. It's kind of funny, you think about John and Clarence and going, well, they're coming from a poor family. They're doing this because they're trying to survive and they want a better life. But then you look at Fred Brizzi and it's just the opposite. His family had money. They had, he didn't need to do this kind of stuff that he was doing, but yet I think it was the draw of the excitement. He was bored. And at some point in time, his father thought that him taking flying lessons would actually kind of calm him down a little bit, which you would kind of think that it would. It gave him another interest to doing other things. And from there, his father thought, okay, it would be a good time, since one of his friends that he met while he was out working on the dam invited him to come back out. They actually had stayed there, whereas Fred Brizzi's family moved back. And so Fred drives out there. And, it's his kind of first time being back. He's off on his own, not with his mom and dad anymore. And this is where he gets introduced into the drug business. His friend, who he had spent several years with there at the dam, started showing him, hey, I'm driving this brand new car that he was able to obtain. Fred couldn't understand how he got this. And he eventually introduced him into the business that he was dealing in. Well, lo and behold, he was actually working for Mickey Cohen at that time. It was very well known that Mickey had his drug fingers throughout most of the United States, especially in California.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, why don't you give us a little background on Mickey for people who don't know who Mickey Cohen is?
Yeah.
So he was actually from New York. He was, a young Jewish kid living in kind of the ghetto area of New York. Like so many other migrant families, they arrive in New York. Many of them stay there. They're just sort of in these tenement housing, very cramped, very poor conditions. And in the early 1900s, he's a scrappy little kid, and he actually gets into boxing for a time. He was a pretty good little boxer, but the thing that, kind of like the brothers, the thing that kind of really lured him was organized crime or crime in the streets, that whole environment. We've seen a number of movies like Godfather and there was another one, I forget the name of it.
Goodfellas.
It was something about America. I remember America was
Once Upon a Time in America.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time in America. Just that kind of a story. That was really Mickey's story. It had talent, had ability, and you start small. You start doing things on the street for the drug guys or for the mob guys. And if you showed ability, you just kind of worked your way up the ranks, which he did. If you know the person, like Bugsy Malone, he was working with Bugsy Malone for a time when they came out to Vegas and organized crime.
You mean Bugsy Siegel? Bugsy Siegel?
Oh, I'm sorry. Bugsy Malone is another movie. I'm sorry. Yeah, Bugsy Siegel. Excuse me. Yeah,
but he didn't like being called Bugsy. He was Ben Siegel.
He hated that name. So just worked his way up. Made his way to Las Vegas. That's really where he established himself as kind of like more of like a kingpin of organized crime, and then later moved to Los Angeles. But like Ken said, like a lot of the mob people, it really started in the 1920s when Prohibition was in effect, and all the rum runners and the illegal alcohol, that's really where organized crime really got its start and became a national issue for the United States government. And Mickey Cohen was a part of that, and then later moved into the drug trade. And as he established his empire, it was easier for him, and he was better protected by, for example, he had marijuana farms in Mexico, and then later branched out to Central and South America for the cocaine trade, but that was some years later. So, it's like a business. You start off small locally, and you just sort of gradually get bigger and bigger, and your reach gets stronger and stronger as he's making connection with other mob guys. In the late 1940s, when he and Fred Brizzi crossed paths, when, like Ken said, the way we lay it out in the book is, he goes out to New Mexico, he meets his friend. Well, his friend's he's basically a drug guy. He picks up the drugs, drops it off, and then gets paid for it. He was kind of like a delivery boy. And the reason that we have Fred go out to New Mexico is the friend wrote him a letter, and because he'd become aware, he was friends with Fred's sister, and they had written to each other, and the sister had mentioned that Fred had gotten his pilot's license. And so he brings him out there and kind of tests the water. He doesn't tell him at first why he's there, just like, hey, just want to get caught up. But then later, when Fred was asking about, hey, how come you have all this money? How come you have this nice car? Then he takes him out to this remote location where there's a drug deal going on, and the friend gives him the money, the guy, or the drugs, the guy gets the money, and then he tells Fred what he's really doing. And because he has a pilot's license, he can do a lot for for Mickey Cohen. And then Fred thinks about it, and because he has a little bit of a troubled past, as we'll call it, with some incarcerations from time to time, he sees, like the brothers, it's like, he can start making some real money, big money. And he goes out to Los Angeles and meets with Mickey Cohen, who decides to give him a job as a drug runner, being a pilot now. And then so going down to Mexico and flying the drugs from Mexico to Los Angeles and other places. So that's where Fred really gets a start in the mob.
Wow,
world.
I love the story when they goes out there and he gets introduced to Mickey Cohen at that cabaret club.
Yeah,
Ken, tell us about that, Ken.
Well, he goes out. He doesn't really kind of know what to expect. He's told where to go, and so as he shows up at the club, he's seated, and lo and behold, here comes Mickey Cohen in and sits down beside him, and this is his first introduction, I believe, into a strip club, because here comes eventually Candy Barr, who is. I'm not so sure she was as much in love with Mickey Cohen as he was with her. He was infatuated with her. And, so here, Fred Brizzi is trying to have a serious conversation with Mickey Cohen. And he's like, well, let's wait until after the show, So Fred really kind of felt odd, which I would have too, if I'm sitting here about to do business with someone and, your girlfriend you just told me is fixing to strip in front of all of us. So you don't really kind of know how to act with that. You just kind of go, you don't know whether or not to applaud or not to applaud. So,
yeah, you don't want to look too enthused in front of your potential new boss.
Exactly. But I believe that was a good introduction for the two to meet because, Fred, like Mike said, he was a wild child. He wanted to do something. He wanted to make money. I don't think he had any interest in going into the same business that his father was, any more than John and Clarence had any intention of going into business like their father was. And so when Mickey Cohen, propositions him with this new business venture, using him and his talents with the flying, Fred pretty much thinks of his two friends. Actually, there was three, not just John and Clarence at the time. There was Alfred. It was an opportunity for him to bring in John and Clarence and Alfred and explore with Mickey, saying, hey, I know you have this great business that you're moving drugs out of. And he never liked really calling it drugs. He called it products. But, bringing this information, this product out of Mexico into California, Fred was like, okay, that's great. But have you ever thought about growing the stuff here and in the U.S. itself? Well, I don't know if it had ever really kind of been done through Mickey's organization, but once Fred told Mickey about what the Anglin brothers had the ability to do. I mean, regardless when they were growing up, if they couldn't do anything else, they were fantastic farmers. My grandfather could grow anything. And of course, his sons were pretty much in that same line. They had access to a farm. They had access to be able to grow stuff in a remote area that very few people would have access to. And so, Mickey explores this with Fred and said, okay, I'm willing to give y'all a chance if you want to go back and speak to the brothers and see if they would be interested in doing this. And that's really where the part of the book really kind of takes off in that connection with Mickey Cohen. We know a lot of this is true because I can look back to stories that came from my family, and my mom is probably the primary source for a lot of it. I do know that the brothers on an early age got caught by their father growing marijuana on the farm. So I do know all that happened. And it for them to just go into marijuana growing is, would not have been something they would have done on their own. I mean, what would they have done with it?
Right, because let's just clarify, what year is this?
Oh, you're talking about late 40s, early 50s. I mean,
right.
it's in the time frame where it would have been. Maybe they could have grown it to use it themselves, but as far as selling it, I'm not sure exactly where they would have been able to sell the drugs at.
Because it would have been a felony at that point.
Yeah.
They would have gone away for forever to grow marijuana on their property.
That was the reefer madness phase.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But then, when you start putting all of these little stories that we know together, them going out to California to meet Mickey Cohen, the amount of time that they spent, the amount of money that they brought back from that trip. I mean, they go out with absolutely nothing and they come back with thousands of dollars, new cars and new clothes, and their lifestyle pretty much changed completely there. It went from I'm wearing hand-me-down clothes to I'm wearing designer suits and coats, patent leather shoes, and I'm driving brand new cars. So you can easily see that trip, once they actually got there, pretty much set the stage for what happens next.
Yeah, didn't Mickey tell Fred at the club? He says he goes, "You got a year." He goes, "I'll see you. You got a year to get me some crop, and then we'll see if it works."
Right.
Yeah, because he, being a cautious man, he didn't want to just dive in there because, it could have been a setup, could have been a sting, and he wanted to test. And plus he wanted to make, promises were made like, oh, these guys can grow anything. They're fantastic farmers. Well, that could just be, blowing smoke. And so when they delivered, Mickey was very happy with what he did. And that's why he brought him out, because he was wanting to expand his operation. And he was looking into going into Mexico and starting another marijuana farm, and he wanted the brothers to head that up, hey, we got a good thing going. Let's keep going with it and make some real money. Because for the brothers, their interest wasn't in growing drugs. That was not a real strong interest of theirs. Their interest was in money, because they wanted to actually buy their own farm. They wanted to move to another state, start their own farm, make a name for themselves, be respectable. And so for the drug aspect, that was just a means for them. That wasn't their goal. They didn't have any desire to live, in organized crime forever. It's just until they got the money they needed.
Yeah, but wasn't that easier than robbing banks?
You would think so.
Robbing banks is pretty. That's the high risk. Growing weed back then was probably pretty easy, and you could probably do it, because they didn't have the resources they have today. And if they were alive today, if they were starting out today, they'd probably be part of the marijuana boom that's happening all over the United States. So that I find it interesting how they didn't make that. If money was their end game, that's a lot easier to do it that way than sticking a gun in someone's face in a bank.
We cover that in the book. There is a chapter which really I can set some of the stage to it. They're, like Mike said, they really didn't have a desire to go into the drug business. And you got to really think about too, back then, once you had the product grown, then what are you going to do with it? It's not like you have the Facebook and the internet that you can go out and sell your product. You either have to know who you're selling it to, and then you're taking a chance. But like you said, it's a felony. You could have gone to prison back then for doing this kind of stuff. And too, it's the getting caught by the family. The family really would have looked down on them for doing that kind of stuff. So they were willing to give it a try, and I believe that they would have stuck with it for a time being. But it was the trouble that Mickey got into later on, which we can talk about, that really forced them into this bank job. So think about it like this. So they're going their whole life with barely making ends meet. They steal stuff to make petty dollars. They never really had an opportunity to enjoy life. Now all of a sudden they meet a gangster who gives them a large amount of cash after he's sampled their product, and they're living the high life. And he's telling them, hey, there's way more to come out of this. I'm going to set you up in Mexico, which is something very few people know about. He was going to move them into Mexico. He was going to give them an area that he had already set up with a farm, and they were going to farm it down there with their skills, and then he was going to ship it back up to California. Well, this transition period of, okay, we're waiting for you to get this done. We're now back at home. We have some money in our pocket. And Mickey Cohen starts getting in trouble with the federal government taxes. And so a lot of that then gets put on hold because he doesn't know who's following him, how he's going to kick this off. So he's telling them, okay, we need to keep it on the down low for a little while until some of this blows over. He thought, okay, this is just a temporary setback. And they thought it was a temporary setback. But at some point in time, they start running low on cash. So
I just want to jump in real quick
okay.
to kind of expand that part of the story. This is when John and Robert Kennedy start making names for themselves as national political figures. In the late 1950s, they hold a number of Senate hearings going after organized crime, trying to not only to try to take it down and to eliminate that as a problem in the United States, but also to elevate their status in the eyes of the people. And these hearings were televised, so millions of Americans are watching every day as the Kennedys and others are going after these mob guys. And of course, one of the people they're going after is Mickey Cohen. So he hated the Kennedys because he felt persecuted by them. He felt targeted by them in Los Angeles. He was getting stopped for no reason and being harassed by the police and getting arrested on these really flimsy charges. And he felt that it was the Kennedys that were really pulling the strings to try to trip him up, to try to get him. And so there was a lot of heat on Mickey Cohen. And so when the brothers were preparing to come back to Los Angeles to set up shop down in Mexico, because of the hearings and all the problems that he's facing and being watched and constantly monitored by the police, he tells the brothers, I can't do business with you right now, because if you come out here, you're going to get caught. I'm going to get busted. We're all going to go to prison. So we're just going to have to lay low for a little bit and wait until the heat kind of subsides. And then we'll just, continue on as we did before. And the brothers got a little bit impatient and they didn't want to wait. And so that's when they started entertaining the idea of robbing the bank instead. So that's what led to that.
Right.
How long of a period were they doing business with Mickey Cohen before they had to lay low?
They robbed the bank in 58. I believe the first time that, if I remember correctly, when they went out to California was in 56. So it was about 2 years that this whole process was going on, because when they eventually went out to California, this is after they had gotten caught raising marijuana on the family farm. So anywhere from like 1956, if I remember correctly from my mom, that's when their first trip went out to California. I actually think they went twice. My mom seems to feel like that they actually went out there twice, but I know for a fact we have photos of them going out in 56, close to 57. It wasn't, and at the same time, they're still growing this marijuana on the farm. Even though they got caught, they were able to find other places to grow it at. But so they're still continuing the product.
So they had just enough time to wet their beak and get used to the money, and then they had to go down.
Yes. So, all of the photographs that we have of them with these nice suits, brand new cars, were all done and taken place after they got back from California. There was probably maybe 8-9 months. And, during that time, like I said, you just said it, is that you get a taste of this good life. And all of a sudden your money starts running out because you're buying new cars and expensive clothes, and no telling what else they're doing with the money. At some point in time, like Mike said, they were expecting, okay, we're going to be heading back out anytime soon, not really kind of thinking about, okay, I need to maybe save some of this money. And then it eventually gets to the point where they said, okay, if we're going to continue doing this until the issue with Mickey Cohen gets resolved, if it gets resolved, we need to find another source of income. And it just happened to be that Alfred is actually the one who went to Alabama to work on his uncle's farm, his dad's brother. And as he's helping him on his farm, they happened to go into town, and Alfred noticed that the bank was a very small bank, not a whole lot of people around. I don't even know if he even saw any cops. It's just such a small town back then.
Yeah.
And he comes back and he tells Clarence what he had found, and Clarence was you didn't have to twist Clarence's arm very hard. He was ready to go in anything. So they said, why don't we take an advantage? And the timing that they actually planned was in January, which with lo and behold was right before the planting season in Alabama. And so a lot of the banks would store extra money in the banks, anticipation for the farmers coming in and borrowing money or getting money out to buy farm equipment or product, whatever they were going to be needing. So the bank was full of cash.
I was going to say, they knew that the banking system. Now I have a question for you.
Yes.
How much of this information was just straight research, and how much of it did you find out from Fred Brizzi?
So Fred didn't really kind of cover a lot of the bank heist.
I'm saying more or less the Mickey Cohen connection and all that stuff.
I'm sorry.
Because to me that's the key to that.
Right.
That's why you have a whole chapter on Fred Brizzi, or actually a couple chapters. But that focus there, I thought it was really. I had like an aha moment. I go, oh, this is where it's turning. This is where it's kind of all making sense.
Because they got a taste of having money.
The research with Mickey Cohen actually is the key to how we pretty much unraveled how everything occurred. And I was able to get that piece of information. And I don't want to share my source because this individual worked for the federal government. But that's how I got the information that Mickey Cohen was the one who originally set the boat up, the contract, how they got off of the island. I mean, he's the one who supplied the information or the boat, the materials. Fred Brizzi, in his 1992 interview, talks about flying them out of San Francisco down into Mexico. Only reason you're going into Mexico is this is where Mickey Cohen had his farm at, which is where they were in turn going. And originally, their original plan was, we're going to this farm, we're going to be raising or growing marijuana for Mickey Cohen. All of that gets put on hold. They get arrested. Long story short, they're in Alcatraz. They come out. Fred Brizzi is the one who flew them down. And the only way that Fred Brizzi knew where to fly them to was he'd been there before. I mean, how do you know how to fly someone somewhere if you don't know where you're going yourself? I mean, and Fred gives detailed information in this interview about where they landed at and the actual time the next morning when they landed their plane and was refueling. So, I mean, he gives some pretty detailed information.
What was that like when he told that stuff to you? It had to be a huge aha moment for you.
Yeah. When I wasn't at the meeting when he met with the Anglin family, he was actually with just the Anglin family. My mom, and this was actually the second meeting, the very first meeting, based upon what I learned in the second meeting, there was some information, there were some interesting things that happened in the first meeting, put it that way. My mom, for some reason, had this idea, hey, I'm going to record this meeting. And in the photo that we have with Fred Brizzi and Robert Anglin, you can see the cassette player that my mom has right between her and Fred Brizzi as she's recording this. So we have like a 45-minute interview where Fred and the family are talking, and Fred's telling the story, and he talks about the detail. But
do you still have that?
Yes, we do. We have when we did the when I did the 2015 documentary with History Channel, and we exposed this to the U.S. Marshal who was in the show with us, Arthur Roderick. He flipped out. He took that audio and he took it to the U.S. Marshals, and they had it cleaned up a little bit. It was kind of hard to hear at first, the original cassette. Mm-hmm. He had it turned into text, which me and Mike have also done the exact same thing. I took it and hired a company to turn it into text. Took a good little while to do it because it's, like I said, it's 45 minutes long. But in it, he details the farm. He details what they were growing. Pretty much the information he gave is how I was able to pinpoint and track down the exact location of that farm. It wasn't that hard. But what was really interesting on this tape was Fred Brizzi was still in touch with the brothers in 1992. He was still communicating with them. And in a previous meeting, not the one that was recorded, the second meeting, he was indicating to the family, he said, okay, I know we sent your questions down to them. I'm not sure how they're going to respond or if they respond. And if they do, I will let you know. So the family, all of the family members had asked questions of them. And the way that they communicated was, and Fred explained it in the interview, he would record it on almost pretty much like how bin Laden was communicating with his people. Fred would record it on a cassette player, on a cassette tape. An individual would come by. He never said who it was. Pick up the cassette tape. He said it would get re-recorded 2 or 3 times before it actually made its way down there. And then they would in turn respond back. So he, like I said, in 1992, I know they were still there, and I know that he was still in communication.
Well, that makes sense why the FBI and U.S. Marshals were tapping your phones and following you for a long time.
Yes.
They must have had word that was happening.
You know, when you listen to the story, Fred actually gets picked up. This is how this kind of transpired. Fred had, in 1976, right after coming back from Brazil, him and another individual was flying drugs out of Colombia, and he crashed his plane. Well, crashing it, he had a shootout with some fishermen who were trying to take the plane and all the drugs that were in it. Long story short, he gets caught. He winds up going to prison, and he gets out in 1986 is when he gets out.
In Colombia or in the U.S.?
No, in the U.S. He gets caught in the U.S. after he crashes his plane. And after he gets caught and he does his time in prison, he had decided that, he wanted to come and kind of tell the story to the family, but it was only after he was, this is so funny. He said, I was out cutting my grass and I came in and I saw an Inside Edition story. I'm sorry, it wasn't Inside Edition. It was America's Most Wanted. They were doing an episode talking about the escape from Alcatraz and the Anglin brothers. Well, he thought, okay, they undoubtedly have caught them. So he decided to call in. And so when he called in, he was put on the phone with a U.S. Marshal. And guess who that U.S. Marshal was? Same guy. So Art tells us about talking to him. And so when Fred started telling the story to them about the Anglin brothers, he didn't realize what he was doing. He was setting it. He says this in the interview. I set a trap for myself, and they immediately came and picked him up. They made him sit down and try to draw out in Brazil where he went to. And he tells on the tape how he said, I kind of know where it's at, but I couldn't draw it on a map. Him hauling around about. I think he was trying to get out of it, and he didn't want to get in any more trouble. He was on parole, and so. But that's really kind of how it started. And then from there, he came and was introduced to the family, told the story, because he was about to tell this story to Inside Edition. And even on the interview with my relatives, he said, before I did this, I sent a word down to the brothers to ask them, was it okay? And they said, we don't care what you do as long as it doesn't come back on us.
Yeah.
So they pretty much gave him the okay to do what he did.
So he was in contact with them the whole time.
The whole time. And I believe the U.S. Marshals knew this.
And it wasn't just Fred. There was a family member who was also going down to Brazil.
Yes.
As well with Fred.
Yes.
Who was that?
So this is their older brother, Robert Anglin.
Okay.
Very few people know anything about him. He pretty much kept very quiet. As I said in our last podcast, if it had not been for he said this one time, that if it had not been for the fact that he got married, he would have been in there. It would not have been 3 of them. It would have been 4 of them. His saving grace was getting married and settling down. But Robert Anglin became the head of the family, so to speak, whenever my grandfather died. He was very protective of the family. The family always knew if anyone knew where they were. And there again, we used to call him Uncle Man. Robert or Uncle Man knew where they were. The whole family knew it, but he would never say a whole lot. He never, as far as I know, included any member of the family on any knowledge that he had. And I know that he had knowledge of it because once I had the opportunity to get a hold of the FBI files and I started going through that, the FBI and the U.S. Marshals knew early on that he was involved. And then it kind of started making sense. Okay, out of all of the family members, all 14 members, well, besides the 2 that were gone and the 1 that was dead, he is the only family member that has ever been polygraphed.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I was going to ask Mike, as far as how often did the FBI and the U.S. Marshals keep on revisiting this? I mean, because you're talking like a protracted period of time of many years. Like were they just, because I know when they have open cases, unless they have a piece of new information, they just kind of put it on the shelf and let it simmer until something goes out. They don't have someone constantly churning on this.
So obviously the escape took place in 1962, and from the get-go, I mean, immediately after they broke out, the FBI agents descended on Ken's family's farm and started harassing them for a number of years. They would show up, without any notice. They just literally walk through the door. Everyone sit down. We got some questions to ask you. I mean, it's all in the FBI report about what they did. Just accusing them. We know you know where they are. If we find out you're hiding them, you're going to go to prison. Kinds of, methodology using fear and intimidation. Ken said that they would intercept their mail. For those family members who had phones, they would tap the phones. You'd look out your window and there'd be a car sitting out, on the street, with people inside watching, taking notes, kind of thing. Or they're walking down the street in the middle of town and the cars would be following them, that kind of thing. This went off and on for a number of years. Up until 1979, that's when the FBI officially closed the case, and all the files and records that they had was transferred over to the U.S. Marshals in 79. And for the Marshals, it's still an open case. It's not until the brothers turn 99 will they officially close the case, which is in about maybe 8 or 9 years from now. So for them, it's still an open investigation. And when the Marshals took over, of course, they started picking up where the FBI left off. They were the ones now going after the family, asking them questions, show up, interviewing them, that sort of thing. And obviously, as the years went on, this has lessened. It's an open case, but I wouldn't call it an active case for them. When Ken did the show in 2015 on the History Channel, one of the things, Art Roderick was on the show, and when Ken and his brother David produced the photograph, actually before the photograph, one of the things that the brothers did, they, and we'll get into this later, in further episodes, but when they were at Alcatraz, they had become friends with Whitey Bulger, who will become very prominent in the story later on. And when they were there, Mickey Cohen was there at the time because he had been arrested and convicted of tax evasion, and he was sent to Alcatraz. So you have the brothers and you have Mickey Cohen and Whitey Bulger all there at the same time in the prison. And one of the things, when Mickey was appealing his case, he eventually bonded out, which is another interesting story.
The only person in Alcatraz history.
And before he left, Whitey Bulger told Mickey, with you getting out, go down to Brazil, get married, have children. They cannot extradite you. They didn't have extradition between the United States and Brazil at that time. So if you marry a national, they can't get you out of the country and you can live free for the rest of your life. Well, of course, that didn't, the brothers didn't miss that part of it. That's one of the reasons why they chose Brazil to hide, but because of extradition if they ever got caught. And so, but it was, you know, when he returned to Alcatraz, Whitey just couldn't believe it. He was absolutely shocked that he allowed himself to get caught. But it was during when he was out that Ken said that's when Mickey had set up, kind of made arrangements for the escape. But it's
That's
interesting.
interesting because I don't know why Whitey didn't follow his own advice.
Right.
Hey, that's kind of interesting because Whitey told me in one of his letters that when he told the brothers, my uncles, that when you leave and you never look back. And he said he made that mistake. He didn't cut ties with everybody, and he almost got caught one time by making contact with one of his nieces. So, he didn't follow his own advice. If he had, he would probably still be
fine.
He would still be alive today, or at least
I mean,
he would have lived an old age with his sweet.
Yeah, our good friend was on the team that caught him in Santa Monica.
Right,
he was an FBI agent, was part of the team.
And one of the other things that Whitey told the brothers, he wrote this in a letter, that when you leave, when you guys escape, you cannot come back. You cannot have any contact with the family. You can't return. You can't talk to them. You can't. You just fall off the earth, as far as he was concerned. That's the only way that you're going to remain free. And the brothers really took that to heart. First they went to Mexico and then later to Brazil, but they were also very close to their family. It was a very, as Ken has talked about several times, it was a very tight-knit family. They were getting bullied and made fun of from, the community. And that really brought them together. It's like we Anglins have to stick together. And, and that's one of the reasons why they formed such a solid friendship with Fred, because he didn't care about their status. They were just kindred spirits. And he was really drawn to them. And they're, the fact that they reported didn't make a difference. And so the brothers really appreciated that somebody just valued them for them. And so they were very close. And when they were on the run, when they had escaped, the brothers still wanted to communicate with the family. And so they did that initially with Christmas cards that through Fred and through Robert, he would bring up Christmas cards for several years to the family. They would sign them, or they signed them. The cards were not put through the mail. They were left anonymously in the mailbox.
Which we still have those Christmas cards.
Oh, right. Do you have photographs of them?
I have the actual.
Oh, I'd love to see them. We can put them up. We can put them up here on the podcast for people, if you don't mind. That'd be great.
And the other thing
that the brothers, photos of them and send them to you.
The other thing that the brothers did was, while their mother was still alive, she died in 1973. They would send her flowers on her birthday every year until she died. Again, anonymously, but they did what they could to still communicate with the family, because the brothers knew, because Robert was giving them the information of what the FBI and later the marshals were doing, that they were still watching the family, still trying to get information, still trying to, get that clue that will finally bring them down on them. And so they were sort of torn between, we want to, stay as close to the family as we can, but on the other hand, we can't reveal ourselves because we're going to go right back to prison for the rest of our lives. They'll never let us out again. So, they walked that they balanced that, that tightrope to do what they could, but not only get themselves caught, but also get the family in trouble, because they knew the family was covering for them. And if they got caught, the members of the family were going to go to prison. So
amazing story.
It really is. It's so deep. There's so many layers here. Every time we're reading, we're like, oh my God. Oh my God.
I know. To kind of go back and talk about those roses, a story that I don't even think I even told Mike this. It is true that every Mother's Day and birthday, the roses would show up at the house, had no signature on it whatsoever. And then the day of her funeral, when everybody got back to the house, there was a dozen red roses on the kitchen table. No one knew where it came from. and the card was signed by Joe and Jerry. And we later find out that Joe and Jerry were nicknames that Clarence and John used to use as childhood friends or kids as they were growing up, and they would use alias names all the time. But no one could figure out, who this was until later on we uncovered the names of them.
That's fantastic. Well, I think this is a good place to end.
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing story. It just is. The more I get into it, the more layers are. And just can't wait to talk about more with you guys.
I can't wait till we get into the trial.
Oh,
Yeah.
I have a lot to say about those.
Okay, cool. All right, guys. Well, listen, we'll talk to you next week.
Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and check out extra content from all of our podcasts. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.